Football, sliced and diced with Sedgemoor FM and Somerset FA.
Welcome to Sliced and Diced, where we're having an open and honest conversation about local football. I'm Ian Nockolds from the Toolstation Western League, and this is Neil Fellows from Sedgemoor FM and Paul Coltman, marketing consultant with the Somerset FA.
Ian, I'm going to take it back off you, because what happens, I've noticed, is that people screw this up as we get on. We need this again later on.
Some interesting origami projects.
Before we get looking at the Toolstation Western League, let me just very quickly say, if you're a fan of a club and you're based in Somerset, or you're a player, or you're a club official, or any way involved in football across Somerset, then you'll want to subscribe to this channel so that you get all of the latest uploads from us at Sliced and Diced. On this channel you'll also get some local interest stories, and you'll get the occasional music related video as well. Right, Ian, thank you for coming on today. Tell us, you run a podcast for the Toolstation League. Tell us what that's all about and how you got into it.
Well, about 6 years ago, the league, I was having a conversation with the league chairman, and we were talking about the future of a thing we have called the Bulletin, which basically is our sports paper that comes out every weekend following the Western League's games. We were talking about what the league could do with that. It's been very popular, and that's really where the idea of the podcast was born, that it would be an audio format of the written word, which I guess is how a lot of broadcast media has evolved out of where we used to just consume media through our local newspapers. And so that's where it started, and I thought we'd give it a go and see how it went, and it became very popular very quickly. And I think there was a novelty to it, because we don't expect football at the level that we're at, which is steps 5 and 6 of the non-league pyramid. Football at our level wouldn't have that type of media, it wouldn't have that type of coverage, and it wouldn't have that type of interest. But actually, when you take the footprint of the league, which I know we'll talk about later, which now spreads all the way down from Bristol to the tip of Cornwall, you've got communities across the South West with teams involved in the Toolstation Western League that actually will be interested in consuming information about the league. So of course, actually what appears on the face of it to be a relatively small interest group actually has massive appeal. And we know that that's one of the main reasons why Toolstation have continued to sponsor the league, because of course we've got this regional footprint, and we've got interest in communities like Bridgwater, like Midsummer Norton, where I started, and all the way down to places like Helson and Falmouth. And so those types of communities have a real association with their football club, in a way that, of course, when we think about professional football, particularly in this area, obviously you've got the Bristol clubs, but you've got Yeovil and Exeter as well, and obviously I have Plymouth Argyle. But that doesn't mean that smaller communities in the area don't have that same passion for their football club. And I think that's one of the great strengths. That's one of the reasons why I'm still doing the podcast, because I love it. And it's one of the reasons why we're still relevant, because those communities love consuming their football.
Yeah. Do you think it's happened due to the change in your audience? Obviously, demographic is quite interesting in this part of the world, but obviously there's a younger audience now that are engaging with football media. Social media has played a massive part of that over the last sort of 10 years or so. Do you think the podcast, when you look at how that has developed, do you think it's the older generation trying to move into the new technology, or do you think that its growth was with the young generation sort of going, actually, I don't read press releases, I like to listen while I'm doing stuff, and so on and so forth?
There's definitely a relationship between the way that we consume social media and online media, and the way that the podcast sort of remains relevant. Because obviously, in the time that I've been doing it, podcasts are now a lot more common, and people will dip in and out what their favourite podcasts are. That's the landscape that we're in now. But one of the successes I think about the podcast, and I think this partly came from my background in community radio as well, was that I have quite a granular understanding of our audience. So, for example, one of our core audience is the league managers. We've got 40 clubs in the Toolstation Western League. The managers are devout followers of the podcast because, of course, it gives them an insight into what their opponents are thinking.
Yeah.
The players love it because they get to listen to their manager normally say something daft on an interview which they can then play over and over again in the changing room. The supporters like it because at least twice a season we'll showcase their club, and it's the official league podcast. So my job is not to be sensationalist, or sometimes I do hear some quite juicy gossip, but if I was to share that with the listeners, as entertaining as it might be, I would be breaking the relationship between the league and the clubs. So when you start looking at the different constituencies, and then Bridgwater is a really fascinating example because, of course, not only have you got a proud history with your football club, but also that I can see in the seasons that I've been covering the club that relationship has grown into the community. A successful Bridgwater United is followed by hundreds and hundreds of people, which is great for me because when I get Dave Pearce on, I know I'm not just going to get the people involved in the club, I'm not just going to get the players, I'm not going to get all the other managers who don't like Dave and they want to try and get one over on him. I'm going to get potentially hundreds of people in this community because they want to hear the success, they want to engage in part of that. So I think that's my understanding of our listenership, and it grows and it evolves, and it's like anything, you nurture it, and what you hope is that you retain it, and the podcast will sort of continue.
Are the numbers fairly even from episode to episode, or do you have peaks and troughs based on your guests?
They are actually even. The answer to the question is even. We do get the odd sort of blip. And that might be if there's a particular issue at hand. So, for example, last season we were working up towards a merger with the South West Peninsula League.
I had that lined up as a question.
Yeah.
So.
And of course, any news we had about that, any interviews we covered about that, particularly when it went sour, obviously became a lot more interesting for lots of reasons. And every so often we get on a chap called Martin Cassidy from Ref Support. And Martin is a fascinating individual because he provides us with the match officials' perspective. And going back to my sort of core audience groups, the players and particularly the managers, they go nuts whenever he comes on because they think he's giving, they don't agree with what he says, but actually that's the reason for doing it, that it's so important. Yes, we'll give the managers a voice, and every so often we get players on as well, so we'll give players a voice. But also we need to hear from other people like chairman and the match officials in particular as well. So.
Yeah, no, definitely. No, I think it's great. You mentioned the merger was sort of obviously that would have been a game changer, I think, for football in the region. Is there anything you can say from what you know where we're at with that situation? I'm fairly sure there's going to be people that would like an update because it's all got a bit quiet.
The sad thing is I can't add anything to what the latest information that we were given, and basically at the point where the merger was off the table, the FA said that they were going to convene a group to look into restructuring football, because I think there is a recognition from the FA that the travel distances in the South West are not sustainable. Following that, I undertook, because in my day job I'm a market researcher, so I undertook a consultation exercise with all of our clubs to say, right, now this is off the table, what does this mean for you? So of course, not a million miles away from here we'll have Nailsea and Tickenham. Nailsea and Tickenham did incredibly well last season, they finished as runners-up. And because they were in that position, they were in a position to go up this season. So this season they're competing in the Premier Division against the likes of Helson and Falmouth. For them, knowing whether or not the travel is going to continue is incredibly important, because it's all about sponsorship and money, and actually it's all about the players as well, because if they don't fancy spending 3 hours on a bus, they'll go and play for Portishead,
go local.
So we did that piece of work, and the clubs were quite clear that they did want some form of restructuring to go ahead. Literally after, almost within days of us completing our piece of work, the FA did virtually the same thing, and we haven't heard a dicky bird since. And actually, so the easy answer to the question is I don't know anything. Right? The honest answer to the question, and I'm probably overstepping my league communications brief here.
We won't tell anyone.
No, but the longer it goes without us hearing anything, the more concerned that our clubs should be.
I agree with you. I think there is a need for it. There was possibly a stroke of luck with the teams that were promoted from the Prem being promoted, because that did reduce some of the travel for some to some extent. But I don't think the problem went away because of that. It still is a massive issue, and not just for the Toolstation League, but other leagues that operate in the same geographical location.
I've got a question. Moving on from politics.
Oh, it's too good.
Looking at the league and how it's shaping up this season, because we're about 8-10 weeks into it, you see that Saltash, Millbrook down in the league.
Saltash certainly down from where they were last season.
Helson challenging, kicking on from last season.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Bridgwater maybe gaining a bit of momentum. What are you seeing? What are you expecting from the season as it progresses?
Well, one of the funny things about football at this level, which is quite exciting for the fans who take an interest in sort of clubs across the league, is that whereas in professional football we're used to teams sort of relatively consistently maintaining where they are in the league. And as you rightly say there, because of a situation of quite a lot of change at Saltash, the team that finished runners-up in the Western League and competed against Bristol Manor Farm for promotion, that team has moved away and moved on, and the club is sort of, is coming to terms with that, and they're showing some good signs of being competitive again.
Starting to climb the table, aren't they?
They are. The Millbrook situation that you mentioned was a lot of the people involved from Millbrook went to Saltash.
Right. Okay.
Because that's another feature. I think I'm sure we've all seen it in clubs where a manager goes and that manager will take. I mean, it's not like in Premier League football, in professional football, a manager might take one or two players with him from his former club. At this level, they tend to take everybody, including the kit man. So Millbrook have had, they've got to restructure around that, and that's why we're seeing. And over the years, we've seen sides at the bottom of the Premier Division challenged by those types of circumstances. Bridport, when they were in the league, odd down for many years. But Helson, who won the Les Phillips Cup, our League Cup last season, and have been competitive since they've come into the league, they're doing very well this season, and I would expect them to continue to do well. Because of sort of a historic connection or friendships I've made with Bridgwater, I've always hoped that Bridgwater would be competitive. Last season I thought you were going to crack it. And unfortunately, we talk about being Spursy. I think maybe there's a Bridgewatery, because I sort of was waiting. I think are they going to? They've had a blip. And it's continued. I'm really hoping that doesn't happen, and if it doesn't happen, I can see Bridgwater pushing Helson to the very end of the season. If you're looking for some other names to throw into the mix, I've been very impressed with what I've seen from Barnstable Town. Good setup down there, fantastic fan base. I don't know if they've played at Bridgwater yet, but I mean
they've gone there, but they haven't come up.
Oh well, that's a game not to miss, because their fans are fantastic. And Buckland Athletic, again, for many years, very competitive in the Western League. When I first started doing the podcast, they had a fantastic run in the FA Vars. Thought they were going to get pretty close to the final. And actually, if you ever go down there, what a wonderful club, a model club of the way that they've built their facilities, they've built their infrastructure, and now they are ready for that next step into Step 4, into Southern League football. And I wouldn't be sorry if they made that, because I think they're a wonderful club.
What about Division 1? There's some interesting things going on in Division 1.
Yes, I guess I'll tell you, we'll start with the fact that Division 1 has got the non-league equivalent of Erling Haarland. He plays for Portishead. His name is Ethan Feltam, and he scored 23 goals in 13 games.
Bridgwater fans will know Ethan, because he started the season at Bridgwater and then transferred over a few weeks in. I completely agree. He's flying, and you would expect him to. A player of that quality, in that level, you would expect him to be scoring for fun, which is what he seems to be doing at the moment.
Absolutely, and what's good for Portishead fans is that he's committed his future to the club, certainly this season. Yeah. So we would expect Portishead, therefore, to sort of maintain their position in and around the top of the table. That's not necessarily what their manager would have wanted me to have told you. I interviewed him on this week's podcast, and he was very much hoping. It's his first sort of full role in management, Kai Mountford. Yeah. And he was hoping that Portishead would go under the radar this season. He was targeting a finish just a bit better than they did last season, which was mid-table. Yeah. And of course, the expectations now are that they're going to run away with the First Division. We would expect Brislington, last season's champions, to do well. They've started slowly by their standards. Last season they finished incredibly strong. I would expect them to do the same. Radstock at the moment, Radstock Town are currently in second. I think Ray Johnson's done an incredible job there. Whether he can sustain it over a season, I would be surprised, so I think they may fall away.
Yeah.
Wincanton Town have been strong for many seasons. And Bitton, of course, have returned to the Western League after removing themselves from the Premier Division last season. So I think they've got a very good chance of being sort of in and around it at the top of the First Division.
What about the other local team to where we are today, Bridgwater, and the newest team to the league, Middlesbrough Rovers?
They've started really well.
It's been a bit of a surprise. I think a few teams have been shocked by how.
Yeah, I mean, I think their manager was one of the first I got onto the podcast this season, because we always want to hear. It's great for everybody to hear from a new team, and one of the reasons we do the podcast is to showcase everything that goes on. So that was my opportunity to do something for the Middlezoy Tourism Board. And I have to say that...
and the campsites will forever be thankful.
Well, the reports that I've had, I've not got there yet, but the reports I've had is that the facilities down there are really good.
It is a lovely facility, yeah. It's relatively new. It was built over COVID, and they're developing, obviously. From what I know, they've got hard standing now for a stand to go in, and they're a lovely little setup. And
that's one of the great stories about football at that level, is that aspiration to join the National League system, to develop your facilities, to aspire to play at that level like Middlezoy have achieved, and to find your level, and then to perhaps do what Nelsey and Tickenham did.
I was just going to say,
and then go up again.
You look at Nelsey and Tickenham up, then up, and they've had to develop really quickly.
Yes.
Okay, they fell on their feet a couple of times with a few bits and pieces, but you've got to have the luck. If you don't have the luck, then you're going to stumble at some point. So, I've been really impressed with Middlezoy, and everyone was saying, they're going to bounce, they're going to do this. So they'll be all right. They'll be mid-table, and they'll be happy with that, I'm fairly sure.
Yeah, I mean, when I spoke to their manager, one of the things I really liked about them, and I think it was the same with Nelsey. I think so. I'm terrible with names, so I apologise, because he was a lovely bloke. He was so nice, I forgot his name. But he was telling me about the core of players and people involved with the club. And I think that's so important. I mean, we joked earlier about what happens when a playing staff and stuff gets ripped out the heart of a club. It takes so long to build that. And where you see clubs that have got a core group of players and managers who are committed and don't have their head turned, players who want to play for the club and not bothered about going somewhere for an extra 10 or 20 quid, that's what football's all about. That's sustainable, and that's the stuff we can celebrate.
No, completely. Yeah. So at the other end of the table, who do you reckon is dropping back down to county football? If anyone, of course, because you can do some sideways moves like others have done in the past. So.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about in the First Division, one of the First Division of the Toolstation Western League is like the Championship, because it is a league in which any team can beat anybody. So, for example, the teams that have started quite quietly this season: Cadbury Heath, Keynsham Town, Shirehampton. Shirehampton were in last season's playoffs. Cadbury Heath were in the Premier Division last season, and so were Keynsham. So just because you've got a big reputation and you've had access to decent quality players doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have success in the First Division. I think those teams will be all right. I'd be very surprised if any of them do go. But what's great for us is that you've got that team at the bottom who can beat the teams at the top. Every game's competitive. So it's very difficult to call that one, because I don't think there's a very good chance that the teams at the bottom of the First Division now won't be there come the end of the season.
I know what you mean.
Which is good news, because of course that gives everybody an incentive to sort of be competitive.
Ian, really appreciate you coming in, talking to us on the podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the channel. And if you want to get extra content and support the channel, then check out the Patreon link in the description.